بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is the 24th lesson in our series on the book of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Al-Uboodiyyah, with the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And in the previous lesson we continued our discussion of the issue of rizq, seeking sustenance from Allah Azza wa Jal and relying upon Allah Azza wa Jal in one's sustenance and not being needy of the people and not asking of the people, and how all of this is part and parcel of being in servitude only to Allah Azza wa Jal, where the heart is enslaved and attached, and its various feelings and emotions are directed to Allah Azza wa Jal in a way in which he is totally reliant upon Allah, and he is not lowering himself and humiliating himself by asking the people, being needy of the people and expecting and anticipating that the people should give to him. All of this makes a servant to be in some sort of servitude and enslavement to the creation. And that's when in the heart there is a desire for things that they possess, for things that they have, right? So this is the way of those people who, for example, they beg from other people, or they expect and anticipate that their needs should be fulfilled by other people. And so here the whole notion of reliance upon Allah and the heart's attachment to Allah, it becomes undermined. And so this was the issue of al-mas'ala, which is asking of the people. So all of this is connected to the issue of ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal, and we are going to continue inshallah ta'ala the same discussion from where we left off in the previous lesson. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he goes on to say, وَكُلَّمَا قَوِيَ طَمَعَ الْعَبْدِ في فضل الله ورحمته ورجائه لقضاء حاجته ودفع ضرورته قويت عبوديته له وحريته مما سواه. So he says, every time the tama', which is like the desire and the aspiration, the want which is in the heart of a servant, every time it increases in seeking the bounty from Allah, the bounty of Allah and His mercy and His hope, right? So he's seeking all of these things from Allah in order to fulfill his need and in order to repel the hardships, then his servitude to Allah will increase and his freedom will increase. So pay attention to that. So basically, the more your heart in its wanting and longing and desiring and aspiring, the more it is directing these things to Allah Azza wa Jal, then the more it is in servitude to Allah, and therefore the more free it becomes. So in other words, true freedom, true freedom from all types of enslavement and slavery to the things and the people of the earth lies in complete servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So the lower your servitude to Allah, which obviously returns back to the heart, then the greater your servitude to the creation and the material things of the world and to the people of the world. Right? So in other words, to escape slavery, then you have to be an abd of Allah, to be in servitude to Allah. So then Ibn Taymiyyah continues and he says, just like, and then he describes the opposite, فَكَمَا أَنَّ طَمَعَهُ فِي الْمَخْلُوقِ يُوجِبُ عُبُودِيَّتَهُ لَهُ فَيَأْسُهُ مِنْهُ يُوجِبُ غِنَى قَلْبِهِ عَنْهُ. So he's similarly, just like when a servant, he has a longing and a want and an aspiration for the creation, and this in turn necessitates that he is in servitude to him, then likewise the other way around, if a person despairs, he completely despairs of the people, meaning that he's come to the realization that the people can't help him, he doesn't expect anything from them, he doesn't anticipate anything from them, so therefore his heart now will not have any desires and wants from them. So when this happens, then his heart will no longer be in servitude. His heart will now become completely free from that created being or that created thing. And for that reason, Ibn Taymiyyah says, كما قيل استغني عمن شئت تكن نظيره وأفضل على من شئت تكن أميره واحتج إلى من شئت تكن أسيره. So he says, the meaning of this is, he mentions like a statement which he said, which is that if you make yourself free of being in need upon someone, if you make yourself to be free of need from someone, then you will be his equal. You will be his equal. And if you bestow, if you give, if you are generous upon whomever you wish, then you will be his amir, meaning that you will be in charge of him. So those whom you give to and bestow your favor to and be nice to, it will be like you are an amir, a chief over them. And if you are in need, وَاحْتَجْ إِلَى مَنْ شِئْتَ تَكُنْ أَسِيرًا. And if you are in need, if you make yourself to be in need of whomever you will, then you will be his captive. You will be his captive. So, the meaning of this is very clear, and Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan comments upon this statement which he said, this is a wisdom, this is a piece of wisdom. When you are no longer in need, if you're not in need of a particular person, you will be equal to him. Why? Because you are a servant of Allah, he is a servant of Allah, you are not in need of him, and he's not in need of you. So you are equal now. You are equal. You are both servants of Allah, and you are not in need of each other. As for when you bestow and give to someone, then you are obviously higher than that person, because the hand that gives is higher than the hand that takes. So you are of a higher degree, right? When you give, when you bestow. And as for when you are in need of a person, then you are his captive. You are an asir, you are a captive of him, enslaved to him, because your heart now is attached to him because of the need you have from him. So this is a statement that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions to illustrate the point. And then he continues and he says, فَكَذَلِكَ تَمَعُ الْعَبْدِ فِي رَبِّهِ وَرَجَاؤُهُ لَهُ يُوجِبُ عُبُودِيَّتَهُ لَهُ. So he says, likewise, in exactly the same way, when the servant's heart aspires for its Lord, it has a wanting and longing towards its Lord and hopes in his Lord, then this necessitates that that person will be in servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. And conversely, if he was to turn away, وَإِعْرَاضَ قَلْبِهِ عَنِ الطَّلَبِ مِنْ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ وَالرَّجَاءِ لَهُ يُوجِبُ انصِرَافَ قَلْبِهِ عَنِ الْعُبُودِيَّةِ لِلَّهِ. So, on the other hand, when he turns away his heart, when his heart now is turned away, and when he turns away his heart from other than Allah and from hoping in that thing, then this will make sure that his heart will remain in servitude to Allah. Conversely, if he turns away from seeking from Allah and hoping in other than Him, then obviously his heart is going to be turned away from ubudiyyah to Allah. And he says, لا سيما من كان يرجو المخلوق ولا يرجو الخالق. This is especially the case when, a person, he hopes in the creation, but he doesn't place his hope in the Creator. بحيث يكون قلبه معتمدا إما على رئاسته وجنوده وأتباعه ومماليكه وإما على أهله وأصدقائه وإما على أمواله وذخائره وإما على ساداته وكبرائه وكمالكه وملكه وشيخه ومخدومه وغيرهم. Right, so basically now he goes on to describe that, like, the people who are dependent and reliant upon other than Allah. So sometimes it can be, they might be relying upon, like for example, a king might rely upon his leadership and his soldiers and his followers, right? So his heart in having his needs fulfilled are attached to these things which are under his control. But in reality, he is basically enslaved to them, right? Because, he's expecting his needs to be fulfilled by them. And likewise, he says, or sometimes it can be upon his family and his friends, or basically from his wealth and the treasures which he has, or it could even be like a person from his sheikh and from his servant and other than them. So in other words, from those people that a person is attached to and relying upon, and whose heart is putting its hope in for the needs to be fulfilled. And so Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon all of this, and he says that, for example, even the kings, we know that the kings have soldiers, they have armies, they have ministers, they have servants, they have all of these types of people around them, and they are reliant upon them for the fulfillment of many of their needs. And so the heart can be attached to these, servants, soldiers, armies, ministers, and things like that. And so what happens is a situation whereby, although he appears to be their Amir, he appears to be their leader outwardly, in reality he is their slave, because his heart is attached to them and reliant upon them and hoping in them for the fulfillment of his needs. So basically we have two pictures. We have the apparent outward picture, where we look at the situation and we see that the king or the ruler is the one who's actually in charge. He is the Amir, he is the master, he is the one who's obeyed and followed. But when we look at the actual realities in terms of the heart, what's happening in the heart, whereas his heart is in reality, it's in a state of where it is in need and attached to all of those people whom he relies upon, then really he is in servitude to them in the actual reality of the affair, despite the fact that he himself is the king. Why? Because he is in need of all of those creatures, and the heart is, this is reflected in the state and the condition of the heart, because it attaches, its wants and needs with all of those people. So this leads us to the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, which Ibn Taymiyyah quotes. He says that Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ وَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِهِ وَكَفَى بِهِ بِذُنُوبِ عِبَادِهِ خَبِيرًا. And rely upon the ever-living who never dies, and glorify his praises, and sufficient is he to be well informed with the sins of his servants. So here we see that Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded reliance upon the ever-living who never dies. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal, all causes, all the means return back to Allah. He is the creator of all of the means. So there can only really be one true cause, and that is Allah Azza wa Jal. And for that reason, reliance, as we see, وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. So here, reliance is only upon the one who is ever living, who never dies. So, as Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he says, وَكُلُّ مَنْ عَلَّقَ قَلْبَهُ بِالْمَخْلُوقَاتِ أَنْ يَنْصُرُوهُ أَوْ يَرْزُقُوهُ أَوْ أَنْ يَهْدُوهُ خَضَعَ قَلْبُهُ لَهُمْ وصار فيه من العبودية لهم بقدر ذلك، وإن كان في الظاهر أميرا لهم مبدرا لهم متصرفا بهم. So he says that everyone who attached his heart with the creatures, with the creation, expecting that they should help him or feed him or sustain him or guide him, then basically his heart has become subservient to them. And as a result of this, there is a certain amount of uboodiyyah, of servitude to them, that he has given to them, to the extent of his heart's attachment to them. Even if outwardly he appears to be an amir, a leader of theirs, and appears to be directing them and commanding them, right? Even if outwardly this appears to be the case, in reality, he is actually in servitude to them. And again, Shaykh al-Fawzan, he comments and says that when your heart is attached to the creation, and you long for, and you want, and you aspire for that which is with them, whether it is material things or their aid or their assistance or whatever it might be, then you will become captivated and enslaved, and you will try to please them, and you will fear making them angry, like you will not want to make them angry, so you will start fearing them. So as a result, your heart now becomes attached to them, and you are taken away from ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. Whereas in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِن يَنْصُرْكُمُ اللَّهِ فَلَا غَالِبَ لَكُمْ. If Allah was to aid you, then no one can overcome you. وَإِن يَخْذُلْكُمْ فَمَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَنْصُرُكُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ. And if he was to abandon you, then who is there that can help you after him? وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. And so upon Allah, let the believers place their trust. So aid is from Allah, aid is sought from Allah, and all of the affairs are sought from Allah Azza wa Jal. And in this lies honor and might for a believer, and it raises him away from being in need of the creatures. And Shaykh al-Fawzan continues to say, فَالْمَلِكِ, the king, for example, when he becomes attached in his affair to his servants, to his slaves, to his own strength, to his armies, to his soldiers, then in reality he is a slave to these things. He is a servant to these things, even if outwardly he is the king. And so what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is describing here is a scenario and a situation, one of a number of scenarios he gives, which happen in reality, which is where often you have leaders and rulers and kings and of that nature, and they appear to be the ones in charge. They appear to be the ones who are, to whom others are subservient. But in reality, the king is completely in need of his ministers, of his armies, of his soldiers, of his servants, of his slaves, and inwardly his heart is attached to them because he knows that he is in need of them, and he even fears them in case his needs are not fulfilled. And so in reality, the reality of the affair is that he is actually subservient to them, his heart is captivated by them, he is actually a slave to them in the reality of the affair. So after giving this example, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah then continues, and he gives us another situation which is similar, and this time it's in relation to a husband and a wife, right? A man and a woman. So he says, فَالرَّجُلُ إِذَا تَعَلَّقَ قَلْبُهُ بِامْرَأَةٍ وَلَوْ كَانَتْ مُبَاحَةً لَهُ يَبْقَى قَلْبُهُ أَسِيرًا لَهَا تحكم فيه وتتصرف بما تريد وهو في الظاهر سيدها لأنه زوجها وفي الحقيقة هو أسيرها ومملوكها لا سيما إذا درت بفقره إليها وعشقه لها وأنه لا يعتاد عنها بغيرها فإنها حينئذ تحكم فيه بحكم السيد القاهر الظالم في عبده المقهور الذي لا يستطيع الخلاص منه بل أعظم. So in this lengthy part here, I'll translate it first. He says, a man, when his heart becomes attached to his woman, in the situation where she's actually permissible for him, so this is a genuine relationship, a halal relationship which is permitted in Islam, and his heart becomes attached to her, then what will happen is he now becomes a captive. He now is a captive. And she in turn, realizing and knowing this, will be able to essentially judge over him and rule over him and basically, preside over him with whatever she wills. Even though outwardly it appears that the man is the one who is in charge, that he is her sayyid, her chief and her husband. But in reality, he is actually her captive, right? And he is her slave. And especially when he makes manifest his need upon her and his love for her and the fact that he can't replace her for another woman, right? He's in need of her. Then in that case, when she realizes this, that this man's heart is attached to me, then she is able to use that and she will rule and preside over him in the same way that you have a dominant master who is oppressive and dominant over his slave, which he has subdued, right? So she will rule and preside over such a man in such a way, and he will not be able to escape from this. So the Shaykh then goes on to say, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, فَإِنَّ أَسْرَ الْقَلْبِ أَعْظَمُ مِنْ أَسْرِ الْبَدَنِ. For indeed, the captivation of the heart is greater than the captivation of the body. And وَاسْتِعْبَادِ الْقَلْبِ أعظم من استعباد البدن. He says, for the enslavement or the captivation of the heart is greater than the captivation of the body. So Shaykh al-Fawzan, again, he comments upon what has been mentioned here. He says that when the heart becomes attached to something, it becomes a captive. And however, when the body, when you are taken in chains, and your arms are tied and your legs are tied, and even though your body is tied and captivated, your heart is still free. Your heart is still free. You are free in your heart to think and reflect and so on and so forth, right? So your heart is not captivated. Conversely, if your heart is attached and captivated by something, right? It could be something material, it could be a woman, it could be, something. Now your heart is attached. And this type of captivation and enslavement is greater and more severe than the captivation of the body, right? As the Sheikh says, that the captivation by way of love and attachment to a thing, this is more severe than being shackled with iron and with chains and with steel, with iron. Because even when you take, for example, a captive who is tied in chains, his hands and his feet, his heart is still free, because that heart is attached to Allah Azza wa Jal. So all of this shows that the enslavement of the heart is more severe than the enslavement of the body, and that this can happen among the people in certain relationships. For example, the relationship between a king and a leader and his flock. He appears to be their master, but really he is their slave. And likewise between a man and a woman, a man appears to be in charge and the master and the husband of the woman, but in reality, because his heart is captivated by her because of his love and attachment, then she is the one who's actually ruling him and presiding over him, and he is a captive to her. So as Ibn Taymiyyah continues, فَإِنَّ مَنِ اسْتُعْبِدَ بَدَنُهُ وَاسْتُرِقَّ لَا يُبَالِي إِذَا كَانَ قَلْبُهُ مُسْتَرِيحًا مِنْ ذَلِكَ مُطْمَئِنًّا بَلْ يُمْكِنُهُ الْإِحْتِيَالُ فِي الْخَلَاصِ. He says, for the one who is taken as a captive, and he's made into a captive and a slave, he does not care so long as his heart is free and satisfied and at ease. Then he will not care. He will not care at all. And this is opposed to the situation where a person's heart, his heart is basically a slave and attached and in love and infatuated with other than Allah. Then this is a type of humiliation, and it is pure captivation, right? And this is because al-ubudiyyah, when we speak about enslavement is all to do with the heart. It's not to do with the body. Its origin is the heart. Everything revolves around the heart. As Ibn Taymiyyah says, وعبودية القلب وأسره هي التي يترتب عليها الثواب والعقاب. It is the servitude of the heart and its captivity which is the basis upon which reward and punishment is given. Because if a Muslim, for example, if a Muslim was taken a captive by a disbeliever, or a sinful person enslaved him without a due right, this will not harm him. so long as he is able to fulfill his obligations, right? This will not harm him at all. The fact that he's held as a captive or a slave and he's put in a prison cell and whatever else it might be, this does not harm him. As long as his heart is free, as long as he's able to fulfill his obligations, this will not harm him at all. And so Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon this statement, and he says that, when a person's body is, put in chains and shackles and he's kept and he's enslaved, however his heart is free and attached to Allah, then this is not going to harm him. Not going to harm him at all. As opposed to the opposite situation, a person can be completely free and but his heart is enslaved by something among the things. Like we said, from the material things, it could be man or a woman, it could be, whatever it might be. Then the fact that he is physically free will not, will not stop him from being in servitude. His body is nevertheless still captivated because his heart is captivated. And for that very reason, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, when he was put in prison, he said, ماذا يصنع أعدائي بي جنتي في صدري. He said, what can my enemies do to me? What can they do to me? My paradise is in my heart. Meaning that they can put me in chains, they can throw me in prison, they can enslave me and captivate me and imprison me. But what else, what can they do to me when my freedom is actually in my heart? How can they take my freedom away from me when my freedom is actually in my heart? With the meaning that my heart is enslaved to Allah, and it only remembers Allah, and it recites the Quran, and it reflects, and it is attached to Allah, and it reflects upon the book of Allah, and it is completely at ease despite the body being in the prison. Right? So all of this, from all of this discussion, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, remember that we are still discussing this whole issue of being enslaved to other than Allah, being attached to other than Allah. It can be sometimes material things like the dinar or the dirham, like physical things like money. It can be luxury, like certain types of clothing and garments and things like that. It can be to authority. It can be to a woman or a man, when it comes to issues of love and desires and things like that. All of these are things that captivate the heart and take it away from servitude to Allah. And likewise, when it comes to the issue of rizq, seeking sustenance, right? This is something permissible because this is something natural that everybody seeks. However, in seeking sustenance, one must be reliant upon Allah Azza wa Jal and not lower himself and humiliate himself by being in need of people, asking them, begging them, anticipating or expecting that they should give to him, and this type of lowly position that a person shouldn't be in, because that then makes him attached to those people and in need of those people, and he will start becoming pleased and angry, on the basis of whether they give or do not give. And so this again takes you away from the ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so after mentioning all of that, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah then went on to discuss certain scenarios that can exist where it appears that someone is the master and the chief and the ruler, whereas the opposite is true. And that's because of the heart, because everything revolves around the heart. So he gave the example of the ruler who appears to be in charge, but in reality he is in need and his heart is attached to his army, to his soldiers, to his ministers, to his subjects, right? And he is the one who, in the reality of the affair, is the actual captive and the servant and the slave, right? Because we were looking at in terms of the heart. And similarly, a situation can happen with respect to a man and a woman, and husband and a wife, where the man appears to be the one in charge and the chief, but in reality, because of his attachment and love, and she is the one who recognizing this, she is the one who becomes his master, because he is captivated by her, and she is the one who is actually the master over him. So after this, after mentioning these two examples, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah then goes on to mention like an issue to do with a person who is taken captive, and even if he was compelled to utter a statement of disbelief, right? Because sometimes there can be a situation, say for example in a battle you are taken captive and prisoner. It could be maybe some Christian or a Jew or a communist, atheist, disbeliever that takes you captive, and he wants you to renounce your iman. He wants you to speak with disbelief, as Ibn Taymiyyah says that if he was وَلَوْ أُكْرِهَ عَلَى التَّكَلُّمِ بِالْكُفْرِ فَتَكَلَّمَ بِهِ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ لم يضره ذلك. That if he was compelled to speak with disbelief and he spoke it, but his heart was at complete ease in iman, then this will not harm him at all. This will not harm him at all. And he's obviously only speaking with disbelief because he wants to free himself from the impending danger and the harm that could come to him. So while his heart is completely at ease, outwardly he doesn't say something, he utters a matter of disbelief. So outwardly it appears as if he is subservient to them, he is their servant, he's captivated by them, he's enslaved by them. This is what outwardly it appears, but inwardly his heart is completely immersed in iman, is completely in satisfaction and at ease with iman. And this is what everything basically revolves around. It revolves around the issue of the heart. However, there are some situations where a person's heart becomes captivated by other than Allah, and in this case such a person will be harmed. This will harm him, even if outwardly he appears to be the king of the people. So summarizing all of this, Ibn Taymiyyah gives us a simple sentence: فَالْحُرِّيَّةُ حُرِّيَّةُ الْقَلْبِ وَالْعُبُودِيَّةُ عُبُودِيَّةُ الْقَلْبِ, which is, therefore, freedom is actually the freedom of the heart. This is true freedom. Freedom only lies in the heart, not freedom of the bodies and the limbs, right? True freedom lies in the freedom of the heart. وَالْعُبُودِيَّةُ, true servitude is in the servitude of the heart. So everything revolves around the heart. And then he says, كما أن الغنى غنى النفس قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس الغنى عن كثرة العرض وإنما الغنى غنى النفس. So he says, likewise, to be free of want, is the richness of the soul. The true richness is the richness of the soul. As the Prophet ﷺ said, richness is not the richness of having plenty of possessions, but rather richness is the richness of the soul. Right? So meaning that if your soul is not in need of things, you suffice with little, you are happy with what you have got, you are satisfied, you are now rich. You are the rich person, because richness is the richness of the soul. Whereas if you have lots of material possessions, cars, mansions, this, that, the other, whatever, then this is not what satisfaction lies in, because such a person might still want more. In his heart there's a desire for more, and he will keep going and going and going, not being satisfied with what he has. So he wants 2 mansions, he wants 3 luxurious cars, he wants double the wealth he's already got. So this person now is not rich. He's not rich, even though physically he has all the riches. And this is because richness is the richness of the heart. It doesn't lie in the issues of wealth and possessions. And so then Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he finishes this discussion by saying that this scenario that we are discussing of a man who becomes a captive to a woman, this is a situation where we are speaking about something which is halal, meaning that, this is a lawful relationship. She is his wife, he is her husband, and within that relationship, he has become her captive. Why? Because his heart is attached to her, and she, knowing this, basically presides over him and makes him her captive. So he will, try to please her and fear her displeasure because of his love for her and his captivation. And so that Ibn Taymiyyah says, this is when وَهَذَا لَعَمْرِي إِذَا كَانَ قَدْ اسْتَعْبَدَ قَلْبَهُ سُورَةً مُبَاحَةً. This is when it is in a situation that's actually permissible, right? That even this is harmful for the man, even though it's in relation to that which is lawful. In other words, it's harmful for a man to be in such a scenario where his attachment to his wife leads him to a type of servitude, an enslavement, right? That compromises his enslavement to Allah Azza wa Jal. This is in a lawful situation. How then would it be for a person who is enslaved in relation to something which is actually haram, which is unlawful? In other words, in an unlawful relationship. So he says, فَأَمَّا مَنِ اسْتَعْبَدَ قَلْبَهُ سُورَةً مُحَرَّمَةً إِمْرَأَةً أَوْ صَبِيًّا فَهَذَا هُوَ الْعَذَابُ الَّذِي لَا يُدَانُ فِيهِ. He says, as for the one who basically, he enters into this type of enslavement and servitude in relation to something which is haram, a woman that is haram for him, then this is, it is basically like a type of, it is like a type of punishment. This is a type of punishment, and these types of people are most severely punished, because first of all they are in servitude to other than Allah, and that thing itself is something that involves sin and disobedience and that which is haram. And so for those people, the type of punishment is going to be severe. So what we'll do is we'll end our lesson there for today. We can stop at this point, and inshallah ta'ala we'll continue this discussion. This discussion is about the heart and it being attached to other things besides Allah and compromising its uboodiyyah to Allah. This can take place in many forms, many ways, many situations, many scenarios, in relation to many different things, to the degree that even a king, right, can be, a servant to his people, even though it's supposed to be the other way around. And likewise, a husband can be enslaved to his wife. And so all of this is on the basis that true freedom and true enslavement and true satisfaction and true riches, all of it returns back. It is in the heart. All these things lie in the heart. They return to that which is in the heart. So we'll conclude our lesson there for today, inshallah, and we'll continue our discussion in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.